Number 1. I'd like to share with you a story that happened to me and my ex-girlfriend. So, my family owns a cabin on a small lake in New Hampshire. We go there every summer. It's basically our home away from home. There are other houses on the lake, quite a few near us, but beyond that, it's a pretty rural area. Miles of woods stretch beyond the lake houses, so there is really no reason to be in the area unless you are hunting, own a lake house, or were visiting the lake for whatever reason. So, one night, maybe 6 years ago, it was late, probably around midnight. My ex and I were laying in bed and just chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, we hear footsteps outside the open window. The window lays only about halfway up on the wall to the side of the bed, and is situated so that it opens right at the bottom of the bed where our feet were. The ground around my house is covered in a layer of spine needles that drop from above, so it's pretty hard to walk quietly. But the footsteps sounded like whatever was making them were trying their best not to be heard. They sounded relatively close, but we rationalized to ourselves that they were probably made by some sort of an animal. A couple of minutes go by, and we hear them again, except this time they seemed closer. They seemed to be right outside the window, still trying to move quietly. At this point, the two of us are starting to get a little freaked out. To our mutual horror, we look down and see a hand slowly coming through the window. Obviously we scream and wake the house up, and my parents come running out of the adjacent room. We tell them what happened, and my father rationalizes it as the event being a figment of our imaginations. To this day, I don't know if he's right. The weird thing is, both my ex and I saw the same thing. So, how could it be our imagination? I feel uneasy staying in that room, and I always make sure to shut the window before I go to bed.
Number 2.
This happened a bit over a week ago, and I felt like the first bigger shock and paranoia has settled in, so I wanted to share what happened with you. I will begin my story with a little explanation about how my apartment building is designed, as that information is quite essential to understanding the story. I have included 3 pictures to help explaining. If it matters anyhow, I am a 21-year-old female. So, I live in a medium-sized town nearby the central area, but still in somewhat quiet neighborhood. My building basically has elders and family people living here, but hence the location, the main doors are always locked, so you either need to have a key or have someone buzz you in order to get inside the building. Once you enter the building, there's obviously the staircase. Well, at each mid-floor, there are some small balconies. I don't really understand why though, as each apartment has its own balcony too, but sometimes people clean their carpets on there, etc. I live on the 3rd floor, and you can see directly into my bedroom from the balcony, which is located between the 2nd and 3rd floor. Here are the pictures to clear up my confusion. This is the view from the staircase to the entrance of the balcony. This is the view from the balcony to my bedroom window. I'm getting chills just typing this now. And finally, this is the view from my bedroom onto the balcony. I'll explain one more thing before beginning with the juicy stuff itself. My building is also located behind a big school building, so I usually don't close my curtains as there's nothing but a big empty parking lot in front of the building at night. A lot of people wouldn't be wandering around it anyway. Now, let's get into the actual experience. It was the night between Wednesday and Thursday, and I didn't have work the next day, so I was just spending some quality time, aka watching YouTube from my tablet. I hear some noise coming from the hallway. Kind of heavy footsteps and the sound of someone occasionally bumping into the handrail, as if drunk or just tired. But that's not very unusual, as I live in a building with other people living in it, so you do hear noise even at night. The part where it gets weird is when I heard the footsteps end on my floor. My bedroom wall and the side of my bed where my head is located against the wall where the staircase is, on the other side of, so it was clear that the person had stopped. I don't hear any doors opening, nor any footsteps anymore, just silence. I found it kind of disturbing that someone was just standing in the hallway in the middle of the night. After a while of silence, I heard the footsteps again, but this time more quiet and gentle. They started to walk back down the stairs. I just thought maybe someone was drunk and entered the wrong staircase or something. Not a big deal. They're gone now. I continued my YouTube marathon for a while, before getting kind of sleepy. One thing I enjoy doing before going to bed is looking out of my window. There is one main road located at the end of the big parking lot, so sometimes I just watch cars passing by before going to sleep. So, I put on some music with quiet volume and began my staring session. During the second song, I suddenly noticed a small source of light and some movement in the down left corner of my eyes. I lowered my gaze and just froze. There was a man on the small balcony staring at me for who knows how long, in my bedroom, in just my t-shirt and underwear. After what felt like at least a few minutes of being frozen in shock, but was probably more like 5 seconds, I quickly closed the blinds and went to check that both of my apartment doors were properly closed and locked. Luckily they were. After a while of shivering in my bed, I came to the realization that the man staring at me was most likely the source of the footsteps. He perhaps had heard the sound of someone being awake in my apartment and listened to that for a while. Then he noticed the balcony and decided to check it out, and then noticed that he can see into the windows from there. I'm not completely sure, but I think he could have possibly seen me before I even went to look outside from the window, as I had a small light on in my room, and it was relatively dark outside and I had no curtains on. If he didn't see me before though, he for sure as hell did while I was staring out the window. At that point, feeling the discomfort of being creeped out without knowing, my thought process was stopped by the sound of someone trying to open my door. Luckily, my door is quite secure, so I didn't think this person could get it open. But then I heard the small letterbox being opened as slowly and quietly as possible. I still feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up while typing this out. I have 2 doors, thank God, so he couldn't see directly into my apartment, but I could hear him. He was breathing sort of heavy, constantly swallowing as if he was either very nervous or just somehow disturbed. I think I held my breath and changed into a motionless wax figure until he closed the letterbox and for some reason sprinted down the stairs, making a lot of noise again this time. I was so fixated on each sound, so I heard the sound of the hallway door being opened, and I assumed he ran out. I didn't dare to look out the window to check, as I was still feeling watched. Nothing will happen that night anymore, but I was certain of getting no sleep for the rest of the night. I called up my mum and explained what had happened. She had work the next day, so I didn't want to disturb her sleep more by asking her to come and sleep here or pick me up, so we just agreed we'd keep the phone line open through Viber throughout the night. I drank 2 energy drinks, not such a great idea when your pulse rate is already sky high, and stayed up until it was light outside and normal people were awake. I fell asleep, unwillingly. I didn't see the man anymore, at least up until this very moment as I'm typing this, and I hope to never see him again. But what did happen, and has made me even more paranoid, is this. The next time I had work after the incident was Monday morning. I hadn't really been sleeping well lately, and had an early morning. I was already somewhat all over the place, but this just scared me for life. As I explained before, I have 2 doors in my apartment. Well, I was leaving for work and opened the inner one, and for my damn surprise, I saw the outer door slightly cracked open. I felt like throwing up and just running into my mum's arms like a little girl, just to go somewhere safe, but instead I had to go to work. The rest of the day I kept looking over my shoulder, constantly having this weird feeling that someone will come to get me, like someone was watching me. Just not a good state of mind. I hadn't heard anything at night, so I am assuming I was just exhausted from not sleeping properly. I am so thankful for having 2 doors, because however he managed to ever so quietly open that outer door, he would have entered the apartment where I was basically passed out and done anything he wanted to me. I reported these 2 incidents to the building's management, and together we filed a police report. They promised to have someone guard the premises for a while, until the situation settles down. I am still sleeping at my mother's house, and I'm hoping that once I return home, I'll be safe and one day be able to get rid of the paranoia. I will not be keeping my curtains open, nor checking out of the windows at night for a while. Number 3. I am 15, 5'11", medium-sized, and have rather long brown hair. At the time, I lived in a house that backed up onto the downs, quite a big expanse of hills and woods. My back garden fence looked straight out into a woody hill, very thick trees, so thick a few steps in and you couldn't see a thing. Now, with enough context, let's get to it. I prefer to walk my dogs at dusk, and so like every day, me and my pretty big Staffordshire Bull Terrier and Wiener dog were out for a walk on the only path in this super thick woods. The sun was close to setting, so I was heading back. It was very common for me to bump into people up there, as it was a very lovely place to run, walk or cycle. I was about halfway back when a man in his late 50s or early 60s walked into view with his tiny, like the size of a handbag dog, in tow. I immediately felt a wave of discomfort, something about the way he walked. I'm not sure, but he was super creepy and odd. Anyway, as we came closer he nodded and spoke in a really gruff voice. I could tell he'd been a smoker for a long time.
Lovely day for a walk, is it not?
Yeah, I guess.
These your dogs?
Yes, they are.
How much for the smaller one?
I was taken aback. I would never sell my beloved dog. I'd had him for 6 years. He was family. He's not for sale, sorry, I replied.
You sure? I'll pay a nice sum.
Yeah, I'm sure. Anyway, I gotta head home.
I'll walk you back.
Around this point, I noticed his eyes were red. Not red as in demon. Red as in his eyes were so bloodshot they looked red. I replied with, no, it's close. I can get back on my own.
Oh, whereabouts?
Don't worry. Anyway, see ya, I said. He then replied with,
I'm sure I will.
That was terrifying on its own. Then he grabs my hair and stops me.
Wait, let me give you my number in case you change your mind.
He hands me a scrap of paper with his number on it. I thank him and ran my ass off all the way home. I threw the paper away. This wasn't the last I saw of him. 2 days later, as I was walking home from school late, this man in a big black coat looks at me from across the street, and I thought nothing of it. Then he turns around and starts walking in the same direction. That was red flag number 1. I speed up, he speeds up. Red flag number 2. I stop, and so does he. That was the third and last flag. I break into a sprint from my friend's house, 5 minutes away from mine. I look back. Red eyes. It's the same fucking guy from the woods. I knock on my friend's house door maniacally, the guy gaining quick. My friend Max opens the door and I jump in and slam the door. Dude, what's going on? Old guy, creepy stalker, he's following me. Are you sure? Yes, I am, Max. Max then tells me to call the police. I did. They didn't find him. From then on, I got lifts from home. This still wasn't the last time I saw him. About a week later, I was in my room playing on my PC. I have to look out the window to look at the trees. It was night, and I could just barely make out the individual outlines of the trees. Anyway, about 10 minutes later, I looked out again, and saw a figure. Normal enough people take night strolls all the time, except he wasn't moving. He was staring directly at my window. Fuck. I grabbed a torch, opened my window and pointed at the figure. I see a man in his late 50s to late 60s with bloodshot red eyes. He smiles and then attempts to climb over the fence. My stepdad, a buff as fuck South African man, sees this from the kitchen. He screams at the top of his lungs. The man then smiles again and leaves. From then on, I walked my dogs in the park 10 minutes away. But every now and then, I saw an old man in a black coat sitting on a bench, looking at my dogs. We moved 3 months later. I haven't seen him since. Number 4.
This story happened a long time ago. Maybe 14 or 15 years ago. I'm a little fuzzy on the dates. I'd have to go back through the news articles to make sure. but I think it was 2001 or 2002. I was 11 or 12 years old at the time and living in a tiny town in the Florida Panhandle called Cantonment, just outside of Pensacola, Florida. I lived across the cul-de-sac from and went to school with a boy named Derek King. Derek also had a younger brother, but I can't remember his name at the moment. Derek and I obviously knew each other. He and his brother lived on and off with their father in the house across the street. I believe they were shuffled back and forth between parents a bit. He was always in a couple of my classes in middle school, and we played baseball in the same league together. So, we were friendly. I always liked Derek. He was gregarious and really funny. He was also a bit of a troublemaker. Well, more than a bit. He was always cutting up in school and being sent to the dean's office for being too loud in classes or doing something or another to draw attention to himself. It was always fairly minor stuff, but the sheer quantity of his antics meant that the teachers all kept him on a pretty short leash. From what I can remember, his younger brother was much more quiet and reserved, not a troublemaker at all. Derek had always been loud and brash, and in and out of detentions or the dean's office. I know some people at school thought he was weird, but who isn't at that age? We were 11 or 12 and everyone is a bit of an idiot when they're that young. But I admit, I liked him. He was really funny. If you can make me laugh, I'll be your friend. Or at least friendly with you. We were never close, but we chatted in class, and we played ball together and always got along very well. Never had any problems with him. I had been in school with Derek for a couple of years, while we were in middle school. We had a few classes together, and he had been in and out of his dad's place for a while. That was across the street from my house, so I saw quite a bit of him, and was pretty familiar with his antics and sense of humour. He had a reputation, but I always considered him pretty harmless, and quite a bit of fun. Around the middle of, I think 7th grade, possibly 8th, like I said, I'm a bit fuzzy on the dates, his behaviour started to get a little weirder and less funny though. For example, all the boys in class had a rumour that one of our teachers used to be a porn star. Total bullshit rumour, but she was the hottest teacher at the school and preteen boys always hung on to rumours like that because it gets a lot of mileage. I think most of us knew it was bullshit, but it was fun, so it propagated like crazy throughout the school and we all enjoyed the hell out of it. Anyway, one day in this teacher's class, Derek raised his hand and straight up asked her if she was a porn star. Obviously, he got in trouble, but it was more than that. I personally saw him using the eraser of his pencils to rub burns into his arms, but not just random burns, like smiley faces and stuff like that. Weird stuff. He also got in trouble at one point for using a teacher's stapler to put staples into his thighs and arms in class. Just weird stuff that threw up some red flags. But you know, we're all morons at that age, and we all just figured he wanted some attention, which he probably did. Shortly after these incidents, Derek's dad's house caught on fire. And not like a small fire, but basically a raging inferno. I wasn't around to see the house in flames, but because I lived right there, I did see the aftermath, and it was pretty bad. When the firefighters got the flames out and went through the wreckage, they found Derek's father's body. It was a mess, but it was determined that the fire hadn't been his cause of death. He had been brutally beaten in the head, his body, and the house has been soaked in gasoline, and the fire had been set intentionally to cover the murder. Derek and his brother were not in the house and were nowhere to be found. This caused quite the manhunt for the missing boys. At this point, no one was sure what had happened. Had they been kidnapped by the murderer? Had they murdered their father and set the fire themselves? Had one of them done it and taken the other? No one knew what was going on. Derek and his brother were missing for a while. I want to say about a week, but it may have been less. The entire time, pretty much the whole community is in a panic looking for them and trying to figure it all out. Keep in mind, this is a very small, pretty rural town. Everyone knows everyone, and the community really came together to try and find the brothers. Some time went by, and eventually Derek and his brother turned themselves into the police and admitted that they had beaten their father to death with a baseball bat and started the fire to try and cover it up. After the murder and fire, they had gone into hiding with a family friend. And this is really twisted. The family friend was a local cop named Chavez. This cop knew what they had done because they told him all about it. He then allowed them to hide out in his home. Not only that, but he began a sexual relationship with the younger brother, who at the time I believe was 11. Fucking disgusting. After a while, Chavez persuaded them to turn themselves into the police. Obviously, he wanted them to leave out his complicity in the fact that he was a paedophile rapist, but it all came out in the wash. To make a very long and complicated story short, the King brothers were tried and convicted as adults of the murder of their father, as well as arson. Chavez, the cop, was tried and convicted as an accessory after the fact, destruction of evidence, perjury, rape, paedophilia, and a host of other things, and all three were packed off to prison. It turns out Mr. King, their murdered father, was a raging alcoholic, possibly a hard drug abuser, and abused his boys horribly, physically and mentally. And apparently he kept them in living conditions that would be unacceptable for prisoners, which is, I guess, why the boys killed him. I heard recently that the brothers had been released from prison, and that Derek was attempting to live a normal life in a different part of the state. I even heard he was in college. I don't know if any of that is true, but I hope it is. I certainly don't condone their actions. Murder is unthinkable to me, the capital crime as they say. But apparently their father was a monster, and they were children, both 12 or younger when this occurred. They will always have to live with what they've done, but if they do have the chance to live 3 lives again, I do hope that they take advantage of it and do some good with their lives. Maybe that's wrong of me, I don't know, but I sympathize with them. I can't imagine how terrible their childhoods must have been with a monster parent, physical, emotional and sexual abuse, and then adult prison while still children. As for Chavez, the cop, he will spend the rest of his life rotting in prison. So, I lived across the street from, went to school with, and played sports with a couple of murderers, and their monster father. I don't know if Derek will ever read this. Odds are probably against that. But Reddit is huge, and this is a pretty popular sub, so you never know. On the off chance that you are reading this, Derek, I don't ever want to meet you again, but I do wish you and your brother the best. I hope you can have some semblance of a normal life, because you still have quite a lot of it left to live. And if you work at it, I think maybe you can atone for your sins.
Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader. So, thank you very much for listening to this video. If you enjoyed, why not check out my other videos by clicking on the links on the screen. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thanks a lot for listening.